Chapter 1. The Journey to the West. Mark was a young man with a big dream. He lived an ordinary life, but always felt that something exciting was waiting for him far away. One day, his brother got a government job in the West. When Mark heard the news, his eyes filled with light. He said to his brother that he wanted to go too. His brother smiled and told him it would be a long journey, full of risk and change. But Mark did not care. He wanted to see new places and make his own name. Inside his heart, he believed something great would happen. The day of travel came. Mark packed his small bag, said goodbye to his town, and climbed into the old stagecoach with his brother. The road was rough, and the days were long, but Mark's heart was full of energy. He met many travelers on the way. Some were kind, some were strange, and some were very funny. They told stories to pass the time. One man said he once saw a river full of silver. Another man claimed that there were mountains of gold in the West. Mark listened carefully. The more he heard, the more he wanted to go faster. At night, Mark could not sleep. His mind was full of pictures, gold shining under the sun, people digging the ground, and laughter of men who became rich in one day. His brother warned him not to believe every story. He said that many men lost everything while chasing gold. Mark only smiled and said maybe he would be lucky. His brother laughed softly and told him, "Just don't lose your heart on the way." Mark promised that he would not. After many days, they reached a small town near Nevada. People were busy and loud, talking about new mines opening every week. The air was full of excitement. A man in a dusty hat came to Mark and said that he knew a place where gold was waiting to be found. He said, "You look like a brave young man. Maybe this is your time." Mark looked at him with wide eyes. The idea of finding gold made his heart beat faster. He thanked the man and walked away, but the words stayed in his mind. That night, Mark sat quietly near the fire and thought about his life. He was far from home, in a place where everyone was dreaming of riches. He asked himself if he could also become one of them. He remembered his old simple days and smiled. Then he whispered, "If others can do it, maybe I can too." The stars above seemed to listen. His brother saw him lost in thought and said, "Mark, what are you thinking?" Mark answered softly, "I think I will try to find gold." His brother said nothing more. He just nodded and wished him luck. As the morning came, Mark looked at the golden light on the hills and felt a strange happiness. The journey had changed him already. He was no longer just a boy with dreams. He was now a man ready to face the unknown. He stood beside the road with hope in his heart and a smile on his face. Somewhere far ahead, the gold fields were calling his name. He did not know if he would find riches or failure, but one thing was sure. His adventure had truly begun. Chapter 2. The City of Dreams. When Mark reached Nevada, he felt like he had stepped into another world. The town was full of noise and movement. People rushed here and there with shovels, maps, and hope in their eyes. Everyone talked about one thing: gold. Some men said they had already found it. Others said they would find it tomorrow. Mark listened to every word with excitement. He told his brother that this place looked like a dream where everyone wanted to become rich. His brother smiled and said that dreams could be heavy to carry if they failed. Mark replied that he wanted to try once before judging the dream. He met a group of young men who were looking for new partners to work in a small mine outside the town. They looked friendly and full of spirit. One of them said they could work together and share whatever they found. Mark agreed at once. He wanted to start his new life quickly. The next morning, they all went to the mining site. It was a rough place, full of stones and dust, but Mark saw it with shining eyes. He felt that every rock might hide a secret treasure. He worked hard from the first day, using his hands until they hurt. Evenings were simple. The men sat around a small fire, talked, and shared their hopes. One said he would build a big house if he became rich. Another said he would send money to his old mother. Mark listened and quietly said he would only like to prove to himself that he could do something great. They laughed together and made fun of their tired faces. Yet deep inside, everyone was waiting for that one lucky moment when their pick would touch gold. Days turned into weeks. They found small pieces of shiny stone, but nothing big enough to change their life. Still, Mark did not lose heart. When one of his friends said that maybe the stories of gold were lies, Mark answered that truth takes time to appear. His words made others smile. Sometimes he joked to keep the group happy. His humor kept hope alive when work felt endless one evening. As the sun went down, a man from another camp came running and shouted that someone nearby had found real gold. All the miners jumped with excitement. Mark's heart started beating fast. He thought maybe tomorrow would be their day. His brother visited him that night and asked if he was fine. Mark said, "Yes, I am fine. I think our chance will come soon." His brother looked at his dirty clothes and tired face and said, "Just remember, gold is not everything." Mark nodded, but still dreamed of the shining yellow metal. As he lay on his bed, he closed his eyes and saw pictures of success, people shaking his hand, his name printed in the newspaper, and his mother reading about him with pride. He whispered to himself, "Just one lucky strike." The city outside was still alive with voices of dreamers, each one chasing the same hope. Mark felt part of that great dream. He did not know what the next day would bring, but he was ready to face it. For him, Nevada was not only a city of dust and work, it was the city of dreams. Chapter 3. The Gold or Nothing. Days passed quickly, and the hope for gold grew stronger. Mark and his friends worked every morning with the same energy, even when their hands were full of blisters. They used simple tools and simple dreams. Every sound of metal on stone made their hearts jump, thinking that the next hit might bring their fortune. The camp was small, but their thoughts were big. One evening, while digging near a dry pit, Mark's friend Tom shouted loudly that he saw something shining in the light. Everyone ran towards him. For a moment, they all forgot their pain and fear. Mark's heart beat faster than ever before. He held the small shining pieces in his hand and said, "We did it. This is gold." The group laughed, hugged each other, and shouted with joy. For the first time, Mark felt that his dream had come true. They went back to town that night, singing songs and planning their future. One said he would buy a new horse. Another said he would open a shop. and Mark smiled and said, "I will send a letter home and tell them their son is now a lucky man." They spent all night talking about life after gold. The next morning, they took their shining stones to a small shop where a man tested gold. He looked at the pieces, smiled slightly, and said in a slow voice that it was not real gold. "These are just normal stones with yellow dust," he explained. Silence filled the room. Mark looked at the stones again and felt his hope break like glass. For a long moment, no one spoke. Tom whispered, "So we worked for nothing?" Mark looked at him and said quietly, "Not for nothing. At least we know where not to dig." That evening the group sat near the fire again, but this time no one laughed. Their faces were tired and quiet. The dream of gold had slipped away like water. Mark watched the flames and thought deeply. His brother came to meet him and saw the sadness in his eyes. He said gently, "It hurts now, but this is not the end. You have learned something today." Mark nodded slowly and answered, "Yes, I learned that gold hides deeper than I thought." His brother smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe the real gold is not in the ground," he said. Mark did not reply, but his heart felt those words. The next morning, Mark went back to the mine. The others wanted to rest, but he started digging again. When they asked why, he said, "Because giving up won't bring gold either." His friends followed him. They worked silently but with respect for his spirit. Even though they found nothing again, they all agreed that Mark had something rare, a heart that didn't stop believing. Late at night, he looked at the dark sky and said softly, "If there is gold for me, I will find it one day." He smiled, not out of pride but peace. From that day, something inside him changed. He still wanted success, but he no longer chased it blindly. He began to see life as a lesson. Some days bring gold, some bring truth. He decided to continue his journey, wherever it led. The campfire burned low, and Mark closed his eyes, feeling calm. He had lost the false gold, but found something more valuable: courage. And courage, he thought, would take him much farther than any treasure. Chapter 4. A Change of Mind. After many weeks of hard work and broken hopes, Mark began to feel that something was missing. His hands were tired, his clothes were torn, and his pockets were empty. Every time he hit the ground, he heard only the sound of his own effort. The dream of gold that once shined so bright now looked far away. One night, he sat near the fire and said to his friends that maybe gold was not meant for him. Tom laughed and told him not to give up, but Mark's eyes were calm. He said softly that he was not giving up on life, only changing his path. His friends looked surprised. He told them that he wanted to try something new, something that did not need luck but skill. The next day, Mark went to the town and walked through the small market streets. People were shouting, selling things, and telling stories of their day. Near the corner, he saw a small newspaper office. A man stood outside reading a page aloud, while others listened and laughed. Mark stopped and smiled. He liked the way words made people react. Some laughed, some argued, but everyone listened. Inside the office, a young editor was shouting at a worker for making spelling mistakes. Mark watched silently, then finally walked in. The editor looked at him and asked what he wanted. Mark said he could write short stories or reports. The editor laughed and said he had no time to teach beginners. Mark quietly asked for one chance. The editor gave him a piece of paper and told him to write something funny before evening. Mark sat in a corner and thought about all the strange people he had met during his mining days. He started writing about one man who always said he found gold but could never show it. His writing was simple but full of life. When the editor read it, he smiled for the first time that day. He said, "You have a strange way of telling things. It feels real." Mark thanked him and left, not knowing if he would be called again. The next morning, when he walked past the newspaper Hop, he saw people reading his story printed on the front page. His name was written at the bottom in small letters. He could not stop smiling. That evening, the editor called him back and asked if he wanted to work as a part-time writer. Mark said yes without thinking. His friends were surprised to hear the news. Tom said jokingly that maybe writing would bring him the gold he could not dig. Mark laughed and said that words might be a better treasure. From that day, his life took a new turn. He started observing people, their talks, and their little joys. Everything became material for his stories. Sometimes he wrote about kind strangers, sometimes about funny men who lied to look great. People began to love his articles. They said it felt like he wrote about their own lives. As the weeks passed, Mark became famous in the town. Shopkeepers greeted him with smiles, and children followed him asking for jokes. He still lived simply, but felt rich inside. One evening, his brother came to visit and found him busy writing. He said, "So this is the new gold mine?" Mark laughed and replied, "Yes, but this one never runs out." His brother told him he looked happier now. Mark said it was because he was finally doing something that belonged to him. He did not depend on chance anymore. He depended on his mind. Sometimes at night, Mark still thought about his mining days, the cold mornings, the hard work, and the laughter with friends. But now, instead of sadness, those memories made him smile. They were part of his story, the reason he had become who he was. He learned that failure could be a teacher and pain could lead to purpose. The pen had replaced the shovel, but his heart was still the same, full of curiosity and courage. As he looked at the small lamp on his desk, he whispered to himself, "Gold was never under the ground. It was always here, in the stories waiting to be told." That night, Mark wrote till midnight. His hand moved fast, his heart light. Outside, the town slept, but inside that small room, a new dream was alive. A dream not of wealth, but of words. He realized that when you find what you truly love, the world around you changes. He had not found gold, but he had found himself. And that was the biggest treasure of all. Chapter 5. The Writer's Journey. Mark's life slowly began to change. Every morning he woke up with a reason to smile. He walked to the newspaper office with a notebook in his hand and 1,000 thoughts in his head. Writing was no longer just work. It had become a friend that listened to him. He observed people carefully, the way they spoke, laughed, and argued. When someone told a joke in the street, he remembered it. When a poor man shared his dream, he noted it down. In every face he saw a story, and in every story, he saw a lesson. The editor often said that Mark had a gift for finding humor in hard times. Mark only smiled and said he had learned it from the mines, where even pain could make people laugh if told in the right way. One afternoon, a small crowd gathered outside the office. People were laughing loudly. Mark went out and saw that they were reading one of his stories printed on the wall. It was about a man who always lied about being rich, but still borrowed money from everyone. The people said it felt real, like someone they knew. Mark laughed with them and said that the world was full of such men. The editor called him inside and said, "Your words are bringing people closer. Keep writing like this." Mark thanked him and promised he would. For the first time, he felt that his words had power, the power to make people think, smile, and sometimes even cry. Weeks passed, and Mark's name became known beyond the small town. Travelers coming from other places asked about the young writer who wrote with truth and humor. Some said they wanted to meet him, others wanted to share their stories. Mark welcomed everyone. He listened more than he spoke, and that made people trust him. One day, a woman came to the office and told him about her husband who lost his job but never lost hope. Her simple story touched Mark's heart. He wrote it in a gentle way, and when people read it, they said it made them believe in kindness again. That day, Mark realized that words could heal wounds that eyes could not see. As his fame grew, he remained humble. He still wore simple clothes and ate with the same miners who once worked with him. When Tom visited him one evening, he said, "You are famous now. Why do you still eat with us?" Mark laughed and answered, "Because these are the people who taught me how to dream." Tom smiled and said, "Then keep dreaming, my friend." They both sat together, remembering the old days when gold was their only goal. Now they laughed at their own foolishness and were thankful for what life had given instead. Sometimes Mark was tired, but the stories never stopped coming to his mind. He began to write about courage, about people who lost everything but still smiled, about women who worked hard to feed their families, and about children who dreamed big, even in small houses. Every story carried a piece of real life. The editor told him that his writing had heart, and that was something no one could copy. Mark felt proud, but more than that, he felt responsible. He knew that his words could shape how people saw the world. He decided he would always write truthfully, never to hurt anyone, and never to show anyone as small. Late one night, when everyone had left the office, Mark sat alone and looked at the empty paper. He thought of all the paths he had walked, the deserts, the laughter, the failures, the lessons, and he felt peace. He whispered to himself, "Maybe my journey was never about gold. Maybe it was about learning how to tell the story of life." He began to write again, and the words flowed easily, like water finding its way. He wrote till his hand felt light and his heart felt full. When he left the office, the streets were quiet. The stars above looked like tiny lamps watching over him. He smiled and said softly, "Tomorrow will bring another story." He walked back home with a calm heart, knowing that he had finally found his true path. His journey as a writer had just begun, and he was ready for every chapter that life would offer next. Chapter 6: Across the Sea. After some months, Mark felt a quiet voice inside him calling for new experiences. He had written about people, life, and dreams in his town, but his heart wanted to see more of the world. One day, the editor told him that a ship was leaving for the Hawaiian Islands and needed someone to write about the journey. Mark smiled and said, "Then I am the man you need." His brother was worried and asked why he wanted to go so far. Mark said softly, "Because stories are waiting there too." His brother looked at him for a moment and then wished him luck. Mark packed his few clothes, his notebook, and a small pen that had become his treasure. The day he stepped onto the ship, he felt free again, just like the day he had first left home. The sea was endless, but Mark didn't write about waves or water. Instead, he wrote about people on the ship. The sailor who sang songs every morning, the cook who told funny lies about his past, and the quiet passengers who sat alone thinking of home. Every person carried a story, and Mark wanted to collect them all. At night, he talked with travelers and listened to their memories. One man told him about losing his family, but finding peace in helping strangers. Mark wrote it down carefully. He felt that sometimes life gives pain not to destroy us, but to teach us how to understand others. After several days, the ship reached the islands. Mark stepped onto the land with new excitement. He met kind people who shared food with him and told him about their simple lives. A man named Joseph told him how he built his small shop with honesty and patience. Mark admired that spirit and said, "You are richer than many men I know." Joseph laughed and replied, "We all have something precious inside us. You just need to see it." These words stayed in Mark's mind for a long time. He started writing again, filling pages with stories of faith, hard work, and kindness. His articles were sent back to the newspaper office, and soon readers in the city began to love his travel stories. They said they could feel the people through his words. Mark spent several weeks among the islanders and learned that real beauty was not in land or buildings, but in the way people treated each other. He saw how they shared happiness, even when they had little. It made him remember the miners, the poor workers, and the laughter that had once kept him strong. He realized that no matter where he went, people were the same. They all dreamed, they all loved, and they all wanted peace. Before leaving the islands, Mark met a young boy who said he wanted to be a writer like him. Mark smiled and told him, "Then write with your heart, not just with your hand." The boy asked if it was difficult to be a writer. Mark said, "It is not difficult when you love people." The boy nodded, and Mark gave him his old pen as a gift. When the ship left the next day, the boy waved from the shore, and Mark waved back with a smile. During the journey home, Mark thought about everything he had seen and learned. He felt that travel had changed him once again. He did not just collect stories, he collected lessons. He realized that life was like the sea, sometimes calm, sometimes rough, but always full of movement. He whispered to himself, "Maybe the real purpose of my journey is not to find places, but to find meaning." He closed his notebook, looked at the dark sky, and smiled. He knew that every story he wrote from now on would not just be about others. It would also be about himself. His journey across the sea had made him a better man and a better writer. Chapter 7. What Matters Most. When Mark returned home from his long journey, people welcomed him with smiles. His stories had already reached many readers, and his name was now known far beyond his small town. The editor hugged him and said, "You did something special. People say they feel peace after reading your words." Mark thanked him and said that he had only written what he saw in real life. He met his old friends from the mine, and they were proud to see how far he had come. Tom said with a laugh, "So you found your gold after all?" Mark smiled and answered, "Yes, but it was not under the ground. It was inside me." Everyone laughed, but they also felt the truth in his words. As days passed, Mark continued to write, but now his heart was softer than before. He no longer chased success. He wanted to understand what really made life meaningful. He began to notice that the most beautiful moments were simple ones, helping someone, listening to others, or forgiving a mistake. One day, a poor man came to him and asked if Mark could write about people who suffered silently. Mark said, "Of course. Every voice deserves to be heard." He spent that evening writing about courage and faith, and when the story was printed, many readers sent letters saying it gave them hope. That night, Mark sat quietly and whispered, "Maybe this is what matters most, to give hope to others." His brother visited him often and said that he looked peaceful these days. Mark replied that peace comes when a man stops running behind things that shine but don't last. His brother said, "You sound like a wise old man." Mark laughed and said, "Maybe wisdom comes free when dreams break enough times." They both smiled, remembering their early days when gold was all they wanted. Now, gold had no value compared to peace. One morning, Mark met a young woman who sold bread near the newspaper office. She told him she read his stories every week, and that they made her forget her worries for a while. Mark felt touched and said, "Then I must keep writing for people like you." She smiled and said, "Yes, because good words are food for the heart." Mark remembered her sentence all day. He realized that kindness, understanding, and truth were more valuable than all the treasures in the world. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about how life had guided him step by step. The failures, the mistakes, and the struggles had all brought him here. He understood now that every loss had a lesson hidden inside it. He said to himself, "If I had found gold in the mine, maybe I would have stopped searching for meaning. Maybe I needed to lose gold to find myself." That thought made him grateful for everything that once hurt him. As time passed, Mark's stories became deeper. He began to write not only to entertain people, but also to remind them of love, honesty, and faith. The editor said his words could change hearts. Mark simply replied, "They changed mine first." He now believed that true success was not measured by money or fame, but by the number of lives touched by your kindness. One evening, when the sky was dark and quiet, Mark closed his notebook and smiled. He thought about his long road, from a young dreamer to a man who found peace through writing. He realized that the real meaning of life was not in chasing gold, but in becoming someone who spreads light. He said softly, "What matters most is not what I gain, but what I give." With that thought, he felt lighter, freer, and more alive than ever. His story was still going on, but now he knew its purpose: to remind others that the biggest treasure of all is a good heart. Chapter 8. Stories of My Heart. Time moved quietly, and Mark's life found a peaceful rhythm. He still wrote every day, but now his words carried more feeling than before. His stories were no longer just about people. They were about emotions, about the strength hidden inside ordinary lives. Whenever he sat to write, he thought about the people who might read his stories late at night: the tired worker, the lonely widow, the boy who dreamed of a better life. He wanted each reader to feel a little less alone. His brother once asked him how he could write so many stories without running out of ideas. Mark smiled and said, "I don't invent stories. I just listen to life. Life speaks to those who care to hear." His brother nodded and said softly, "Then you are truly rich, Mark." Mark laughed and replied, "Yes, rich in stories of the heart." One morning, the editor told him that people from other towns were writing letters, asking for a collection of his best stories in a book. Mark felt surprised. He had never thought about publishing a book. The editor said it would inspire others, and that his writing had already helped many people find courage. Mark went home and thought deeply about it. He remembered his first failure in the mines, the days of hunger, the nights of laughter around the fire, and the first article that had made people smile. Every moment had built the man he had become. That night, he opened an old wooden box where he kept his early notes, yellow pages filled with rough handwriting. He read them one by one and smiled. They were simple, even childish, but full of honesty. He decided he would collect them all and rewrite them in a new way as a record of his long journey. The next few months passed in quiet work. Mark spent his days writing and his evenings talking with people. He believed that listening was as important as writing. One day, a young reader visited him and said, "Your stories make me believe that goodness still exists." Mark looked at the boy and said gently, "Then promise me something. When you grow up, don't just believe in goodness. Be the reason for it." The boy smiled, and Mark felt proud. He saw himself in that young face, the same hope, the same hunger for meaning. He realized that maybe this was why he had lived through so many changes, to pass on the light to someone else. When the book was finally printed, the editor placed a copy in Mark's hands. The cover had his name in bold letters, but Mark only touched the pages with quiet joy. He said, "These are not just stories from my mind. They are stories from my heart." The editor nodded and told him that his book would travel to many places. Mark replied, "Then I hope it travels where it is needed most." As readers began to send him letters of love and gratitude, he felt thankful but humble. He knew that fame was temporary, but kindness stayed forever. One evening, Tom came to meet him after a long time. They sat together, remembering their mining days. Tom said, "We were foolish back then, but those days made us who we are." Mark agreed and said, "Yes, The gold we never found became the light that guided us here. They laughed and shared stories until midnight. Before leaving, Tom said, "Your words reach far, my friend. You have done something great." Mark smiled and replied, "I only wrote what life taught me." When Tom left, Mark sat near his desk, thinking about how far he had come. As he looked at his notebook, he whispered, "I did not find gold, but I found something brighter. People, truth, and love." He thought of the strangers who had become friends, the faces he would never forget, and the lessons he would always carry. He realized that every person he met was like a page in his book, and together they made the story complete. That night, before going to bed, he wrote a final line in his diary. "The world gives us stories, and stories give us the world." Mark closed his notebook, placed his pen beside it, and looked out of the window. His heart was calm, his mind free. He had found his treasure, not in the ground or in the sky, but in the hearts he touched with his words. As the night grew silent, he smiled and said softly, "My journey is not over. It has only changed its shape." He knew that even if he stopped writing, his words would keep living in the hearts of people. And that, he thought, was the truest form of gold.